Good morning. Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 3 of MeasureUp Mornings. And welcome to our Optimising Creative and Media Effectiveness session. I'm Natalie Stanbury, the Research Director at the IAB. And the IAB has been hosting an hour of inspiration each morning this week for our annual MeasureUp conference. If you did miss Monday's session on sustainable measurement case studies, or yesterday's session on privacy and the data exchange, these sessions have been recorded and you can catch up on those later. Today, we're going to get into the details of optimizing attention, creative, and media effectiveness. A very warm welcome to our great lineup of expert speakers we have today. This morning, they'll be discussing creative and executional best practices for cutting through, gaining attention, and optimizing creative and media environments to ensure your campaign has the best chance for success. We're going to explore a range of research measures that can be employed to leverage media context and make highly effective ads. A very big thank you to our sponsors who have enabled the IAB to present an amazing lineup of content this week. Our sincere appreciation for your support of MeasureUp. To kick us off this morning, I'd like to introduce to you Fiona Walford, the Head of Creative Works at Google, to present on creative as the last unfair advantage.
Hello there, my name is Fiona Walford and I'm Head of Creative Works at Google AUNZ. I'm very, very pleased to be here today. I'm basically here to talk to you about the last unfair advantage in business, which I believe is creative. This is obviously not my quote. This is a quote directly from Bill Bernbach of DDB fame, but I think is incredibly relevant and could not be more relevant than today, and finding those little opportunities that can make a really massive difference. It's a really exciting time to be working in creative as we learn more and more about the opportunities for clients and brands, and work closely with creative and production companies to bring out the very, very best from these learnings that I'm going to share with you today. What is so incredible is the speed of change and understanding. We are learning more every 6 months than personally I think I probably was able to learn in the first 20 years of my time in business. And yes, I am that old. So it's really, really fascinating. We're finding out more and more and trying to understand those details and bringing them to you to help to really craft the very best that we can do. But I think importantly, it's like, why now? So we used to, in the olden days, run a campaign and perhaps 6 to 8 months later, have some sense of how it performed. Then we can maybe make it a little bit better, but it was always comparative. A little bit of measurement and probably a little bit of folklore. We simply have so many more modes of inquiry now, ways to measure and access to data. So from our perspective, there's things like brand lift surveys and YouTube watch time. And then really there's hundreds of experiments that we've run with clients. And then over to the other side, we can look at what machine learning can help us to understand at scale. And then you throw in geographies and verticals and formats and even new kinds of experimentation that we're testing all the time. It's really enabling us to get to a point where we can understand new answers and new help. So some of you will be very familiar with this iceberg slide, and I think you've probably seen some versions of it, certainly during MeasureUp. It's really interesting because we're challenging norms, right? So we've known for a long time that roughly 30% of your return of investment is run by media. It's delivered by your medium, it's delivered by the targeting you've chosen, the audience that you've reached, and making sure that you're tweaking that as you're going on. But we know that up to 70% is actually about what's run in that space. So it's about the creative work. It is the true differentiator between what is working really, really well and what we can optimize and the levers that you can pull from a media perspective, but the kind of enormous impact that you can have with getting your creative right. And it's not just us saying it, we've looked at hundreds and hundreds of studies, and everybody from Kantar to Analytic Partners to research from Cannes and from Nielsen, all of the research backs this up. Creative is not only the dominant driver of business results, but it's the dominant driver by an order of magnitude. So if there's one place to focus your time and energy, it is changing or evolving your creative. All right, so a little spin back to that lovely iceberg. We've long held the belief as well, when we look at that split between media and creative, that has been very much in the media world about those known quantities, the sort of science behind it, the data and the efficiency, versus what potentially we always felt with creative was a little bit about magic, folklore and instinct. That was what, was great creative. But I think the work that we are doing is actually laddering up to some degree, changing that. These areas at the top will never, ever drive an amazing creative idea. But what it will help to do is to tune it and to help us to understand more about it. What it's actually doing is giving us illuminating, interesting, and I guess insightful facets of creativity that we can learn from. And I think it's worth saying as well at this moment that this isn't as simple as what it used to be in terms of media and creative split, because the beauty of media is it's become increasingly automated. It optimizes and optimizes and optimizes to make sure you're getting the very best from your money. If you look at this example on the right for apps, we're actually in a world with that, where a blend of kind of media and creative is very automated. What we do is we feed in lots of different assets to the creative system that helps to understand which ones work better and automate off the back of that. But you need to keep feeding that system. Less relevant for media, where you can just keep optimizing it and making sure that it's delivering your business results as you go. So what have we learned? And what is it that we've started to kind of develop within this? Well, basically, it's not just how an ad performed. It's not that simple. It's actually about the elements of the ad and how those are formed. So that could be something like the editing style, or the narrative structure, or how the messaging works, perhaps the use of humans, how the product's presented, what the branding is. All of these are elements we can look across thousands of ads and ask, how do they work? Not just that, but also across business objectives. Are you wondering about ad recall? Is it all about consideration lift or purchase intent? We can now really start to get an understanding from those areas what it is that's making creative work. And now even business outcomes, such as in-store traffic or downloads, or perhaps driving to a website. Once you start adding in audiences, like, I don't know, young mothers and empty nesters, how do those messaging elements, those creative elements change for all those constituents? And geographies, it's an unbelievable level of insight that we've never been able to see before. And fundamentally, we understand so much more about these many elements of ads, and it's a relatively short period that we've been able to do this. You can see here, just within Google, how our measurement has evolved significantly over a relatively short period of time, with 2022 due to be this bigger year of data sets and validation at scale. So enormous change in a relatively short period of time. Now, the good news is all of this information is available to you. The slightly good news is there is no checklist. You cannot go boom, 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 flick a lever and just take advantage of it. But that's also good news, right? Because it means that if you engage, you focus, you work with us, there's enormous upside available to you that potentially other brands are not going to be taking advantage of it. So that's a real opportunity. And you know what? If it was easy to do, everybody would be doing it already. The magic, folklore and instinct is still a very fundamental part of the creative idea, but the levels of understanding that we can bring to you now really, really help to make you maximize the work you are doing. So what have we found out? Well, actually, what's really interesting and the most disruptive creative opportunity we've seen is actually inside the ads itself. It's that area that we can maximize, the way that they're put together. So let me bring that to life a little bit more for you here. What are the 3 things you should know to take advantage of this opportunity? Well, some on the left-hand side are as simple as editing, and some are far more significant. And of course, therefore, it varies by the stage you're at with your creative, and we're not necessarily focused on rules here, but storytelling possibilities and patterns we've seen success from in the more structure and substance areas. So let me just dive in a little bit deeper on those 3 areas. So just one quick slide on each one. Number 1, understanding the surface of the ads. These are the editable elements, relatively easy to change from an ad that's potentially already created. This is framing and pacing. This is potentially large site supers where they're relevant. Use of audio, as you know, YouTube is played 95% sound on. It's not a place you go to learn how to lip read. Well, probably is actually. There's almost certainly some amazing ads there. Bright, high contrast colors seem really simple, seem really common sense, but you can make a real difference with them. Changing those things can really increase performance by up to 10 to 20%. So that's pretty significant when you think if you had a single media dollar and it was suddenly worth 10 to 20% more, you would be pretty happy with that. This example we've shown here is for Mondelez Sour Patch Kids. They saw no lift on the platform from their very first ad. We worked with them for some zooming in, brighter colors, faster pacing. The change in results were really quite significant. You can see we put some supers on there as well. So we really worked with them, and it made an enormous difference for the results for them. Diving into those other areas that require a bit more detail but have bigger upside, the second area is structure. This is the kinds of storytelling you choose, the way the stories unfold around the nature of attention. Now, there's a bit of a misnomer. A while ago, there was some work done about the fact that we all had the attention span of less than a goldfish, which at the time I think was 9 seconds, so we were around 8 seconds. Arguably, as attention spans actually got smaller, but in fact, our ability to pay attention has got longer. Movies have got longer, books have got longer, chapters have got shorter, interestingly. So what this is about grabbing attention and maintaining it so it can be a really, really rich experience. So how do you grab someone from the beginning, get them to watch, and get them to watch for longer? How are you combining formats, creating video in perhaps sequence? And then maybe how are you using signals that we can learn to drive better relevance? This is harder to do, and there's greater upside. That's the most important thing. You can achieve, 50 to 100% we've seen increases in performance. This example is for Amazon, where we worked with a TrueView format that they had already, and then cut from that shorter ads of 6 seconds and then sequence them one after another, thereby teasing out the story and giving more frequent messaging. Again, a significant shift in this instance. It was about consideration was the output from that. So we worked very closely with them to make sure we maximize that opportunity for them. And then the final area is the substance of the ad. These are how the products are presented, perhaps how humans are used in them, and a lot of industry-specific elements. So for instance, if you're in the food industry, this is about how to make your food especially delicious. Or in this instance, this was how to work in the autos industry, how you should show the interior of ads actually more than the exterior of the cars in auto ads. For BMW, this included a change from the initial storytelling ad to a focus on the features in the car, driving ad recall as far as higher as a result. This also is harder to do, but you can obviously get a 50 to 100% upside again. So it's incredibly powerful as an opportunity. Again, we've got vertical specific information here. We've got lots more detail about how to make that work. And it's not just us claiming we can do it. We have done hundreds of experiments with clients around the world to establish this. And recently we did some work with Kantar that showed if you follow the top 5 kind of tips that we've got on effectiveness, you can see up to a 30% increase in short-term sales and a 17% increase on longer-term brand contribution. Some of these areas I've already covered. A lot of it is about the storytelling, the attention grabbing, but some of it is also about the simple editing areas as well. If you're not familiar with this study, please do reach out to your AUNZ sales team to help here. Many of these are also verticalized, so industry specific for extra insight. And then therefore it obviously represents incredibly meaningful available data and value. So this is exciting as well, because what's really interesting, we've been doing some testing, is the kind of old way of creating TV ads. We've been working on to make sure that we can maximize. So some ads ran on TV, there were some results off the back of it. We then took that ad and we changed it to make sure it was created to drive attention. What then happened is we put that ad back on TV and the results were better. So basically making to drive attention, making for YouTube, making for mobile fundamentally is a brilliant way to drive better results all around. And we're here to help tell your stories and obviously not just edit TVC. So we want to start from the right place and make those as impactful as possible. And I think it's worth saying, this is not about machine learning and everybody turning out the same ad. This is about experimentation. We want to access a bunch of different stories. We're not about trying to make every ad the same, which is why there's no checklist, right? There's no 10 things to do and everyone's a winner. We want to work with you on your specific needs and making sure that you're leaning into those 3 different areas to make sure that you maximize the 3 S's, as we can call them, to make your ad work as well as possible. So just a quick wrap up. What are the 3 things that you should be really aiming to do here? Number 1, learn this new language. Don't kind of imagine you can just outsource it to your agency or production partner, because actually if you're improving these ads, if you're approving these ads, you need to know what's different about them in order to take advantage of this new power. Secondly, don't leave value on the table. Don't just take advantage of the tactical elements, but understand the storytelling of your ad so that you can take advantage of the full spectrum of value that's available to you. And lastly, really lean into your partnership with us, right? We're here to help. We understand a lot. We can share a lot. We're happy to consult on briefs, on assets you already have in development. And we're really, really happy to run experiments with you. Just give us a call. We want to make sure that everybody's getting the very maximum they can out of this opportunity. So a huge thank you for listening. Do get in touch. I really, really appreciate your time and mainly your attention. Thank you very much.
Very warm welcome, Peter Pinter, the CEO of Neuroinsight. Pete's actually going to show us today how to put neuroscience to work for your brand. Neuro's techniques are being widely used to optimize creative, leverage media context, and more deeply understand ad impact. Pete's got a presentation here packed with real case studies, and I'm really looking forward to it. Welcome to the stage, Peter.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you. Just confirming, thank you for that lovely introduction. Confirming you can see my screen, and that's all a good thing. All right. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed that technology works for us from here on in, and thank you to Fiona as well for the setup.
Thank you.
Yeah, terrific. Hey, look, again, thank you, Nat, the IAB, and everyone who's joined us this morning. Real thrilled to be talking about media, creativity, and how we find the upside. And yes, a big thank you to Fiona, because here's my iceberg for today. A slightly different meaning, a slightly different context, but here we go. The iceberg I want to talk about is really, this huge area of our system 1 processing, as they call it, that is subconscious, that is beyond our conscious access and reach, and it's below the waterline. And that's just so important when it comes to our response to media content and, of course, creative content, which is what we're talking about today. So if you're using, I guess, traditional techniques and comparing that to what we're talking about with Neuro, Neuro on the right-hand side, of course, measures all brain activity, whether it's conscious or subconscious, as opposed to like a traditional technique, but like a survey or a focus group, which may only tap, part of the tip of the iceberg, which is that conscious and that sort of rational part of our response. So in summary, we would say neuroscience captures the subconscious very importantly. Content is always in context. It's in the moment, and it's reported on a second-by-second basis. So very, very granular. So yes, we are always asked, and probably more so these days, where does this buzz about attention come into the discussion? Well, I guess the first thing we would say is that, look, anything that evolves our understanding of impact, of media and environment and message is a good thing. So bring it on, we say, because the evolution beyond standard media metrics is just so overdue. I think we would all agree, beyond those sort of tonnage metrics of sort of reach, frequency and viewability. So I think you'll find that we're all aligned on that one. We've strove to basically measure long-term memory, and I guess the answer comes in what your particular metric tends to explain. What does it correlate with? And so we've strove to link our metrics to real-world sales data, real-world behavior. And that's just such an important thing in terms of what you should be asking yourself when it comes to attention, if you like. We also measure other layers of attention, like visual attention, general attention, from a neuro brain point of view. And we find that visual attention itself explains or correlates to about 15% of what long-term memory encoding does, and that link to real-world behavior. If we were to frame that in a slightly different way, here's what we would say is our mental communications spectrum. If the goal on the far top right is to get into the mind of the consumer, strengthen that mental availability, and reinforce it. The other correlates which we find playing a huge effect are the subconscious, low attention processing, creative, context, emotion, many variables, audio, sound, frequency effects, and really interesting priming effects, storytelling, moments and glances can all tend to explain why memory encoding or why an ad walks through the doorway to memory. That can all be filtered down to one metric, which is called the neuro impact factor. And again, that one metric is being embraced by the industry more and more, as we find with the OMA in their currency. Sight, sound, context, emotion, storytelling, and even previous consumer experience with your brand has a role to play in that correlation. So that's what we find in terms of a very strong correlation. In this case, 86% between the neuro impact factor, our one metric, and our clients' advertising sales effectiveness in market through econometric modelling there. So very important. On to our very favourite topic, which is context. Now, media context plays a huge role in shaping and influencing the way your ad and your creative gets processed and gets stored into long-term memory. We've done some really interesting work with IAS just recently out of New York, and I'm sure you'll be hearing about it in this market too, where they've found that if the creative matches the environment with which it's in, you can get an additional 25 to 40% of long-term memory encoding. But here's the point. When an ad walks through the doorway to memory, it's joined by a range of other contextual ingredients at the moment of exposure. And that's the brain's way of storing that information in the most relevant way. And this is where context is so vitally important, because context shares its equity with an ad as it's stored in long-term memory. And here's a great example of how exactly that's done. So there's a way to actually define this and understand and put a label on this contextual fabric. What you're looking at here is realestate.com.au, and the average is 120. Strong is that outer dotted line of 140. And if we go in a clockwise direction, Australian, opportunity, informative, premium, trust, all very strong attributes of the contextual fabric of realestate.com.au. And if we look at an advertiser, for example, a typical advertiser like NAB, that's a good example of what they might look like in that environment. Our lowest rates ever, 2-year fixed rates in realestate.com. We've all seen it. What we can do is measure that creative on the same basis. And you can see that the creative intrinsically is that yellow line there. It matches the environment on trust and Australian in terms of strength, but before it's exposed in context, it's weaker on opportunity, information, and premium. However, if we look at the green line, the measure of that creative after it's been in context, you can see how it takes on the complexion of the surrounding media environment, and it actually grows where it was weaker than the environment pre. It actually takes on the composure and the complexion of that environment post. Here's a great way to look at it. Yellow data pre, green data post, and it grows on opportunity, informative, and premium to reflect that of the environment. What it does also do is it maintains its strength on Australian and trust. Again, it matches the environment. So you've seen two really powerful strategic forces in how context influences stories and creative growth, as you've seen, or maintenance. But there's one other invisible, really interesting thing that goes on at the same time. As attributes are grown as a function of context, they can simultaneously compress the competition, and they can suppress the competition's ownership of the same attributes. Here we can see opportunity, Australian, and to a small degree premium, shrinking or weakening with the CommBank at the same time as they grow in the context. So context is a hugely powerful force, and one that shapes the meaning of creativity in every single exposure that we see. Again, like Fiona was saying, we all violently agree that creativity is a very, very powerful force these days. And here's one way that we'd like to, I guess, share what we've seen being used really successfully. Power moments that we call iconic triggers in long form video content mainly can be used and repurposed to glue your campaign together. It's called multi-screen ready, and it's where you take one scene, which is the power moment that's already gone into memory, to strongly prime other mediums. And it's a great way to use and repurpose shorter form content. And when you use the right scene, the iconic trigger, it can prime other parts of your media mix by about 15%. So here again, we're finding that 15% stronger walking through the doorway to memory. So cross-media priming is a very, very powerful effector too. So perhaps think about how you can use the strongest, most influential moment in your ad to prime others. And we call it the Neuro iconic trigger. Okay, Nat, I think that's me in my 10 minutes. I've tried to be as strict as possible on that one. I guess without further ado, it's my turn to hand over to Mike, who I hope has joined us by now, and we can kick on from there.
Thank you so much, Pete. Some very inspiring case studies to get us thinking there. We're going to now move into onto the area of attention measurement. Human attention is a very precious resource, and grabbing this from distracted customers is often difficult, but the essential first step in advertising effectiveness. We've got two presentations today to demonstrate attention metrics and measurement and how to drive attention to advertising. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Mike Follett, the Managing Director at Lumen Research. Mike's going to inform us on how much predictive attention estimates can inform ad performance. Mike's got the screen there. Mike's going to be presenting InSkin's specific model of attention that takes into account the impact of size, time, and creative. And he's got some interesting results here from L'Oreal. Very warm welcome today, Mike.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
We can, certainly.
Very good. Well, listen, thank you very much
for
having me, and I hope that I fare better than the lady from Google. So if I you'll tell me, I'm sure, if I start to freeze up and that. But listen, very nice to see you all. Thank you very much for your time. Yes, my name is Mike Follett. I'm the Managing Director of Lumen Research. We're an eye tracking company. We've developed some technology that turns this webcam here on your computer, or this webcam on your mobile phone, into a high quality eye tracking camera. We collect a load of data from large panels all around the world, and turn that data into predictive models of attention. Our tech works across desktop and mobile. We have big permanent panels in the UK and the US where we pay people $10 £10 a month to permanently download our technology and passively track everything they do online. But then we also set up temporary panels. We set in about 3,000 to 4,000 people a week in places like France, Germany, Italy, and Indonesia is the latest one, and also in Australia. So we have lots of data from around the world to power the models that I wanted to talk to you about today. We work mainly with people on the buy side of things, so with Chanel and Adidas, a lot of British companies and a lot of companies in the States, people, big FMCG companies over there. But we also do work with publishers and platforms, and as Nat said, we're talking about some data from InSkin today. The final thing to say is a lot of our stuff is up for awards. Last week we won a big award over in London, the Media Week Awards for the sort of predictive modeling technique. I say this because I know that Rob is on afterwards. We're a company very similar to Playground. I know that they win a lot of awards as well, and Australia is very impressive in producing technology like this. Okay, so why does this matter? Fiona, you're back again. Can you hear us? Do you want,
I can.
Natalie, do you want me to kick off? Shall I keep on going and then we can
Yeah,
okay, brilliant. Well, I'll carry on going. Not at all. Why does this matter? Well, unseen is unsold. You can't buy things from advertising unless you notice the advertising. With respect, of course, to our good friends at Spotify and in radio and things like that, there is audio attention as well. But if you don't engage with things, it cannot work. And engaging with things isn't the same as it just simply having the opportunity to see, but also actually looking at things. People are very good at ignoring stuff. And in advertising, we often think that what we do is very, very important. We notice the ads that we make because our mortgages depend on it. Of course, we notice it. We're paid to notice it. The trick is to try and understand if people out there in the real world also notice this stuff. And the fact is that people are very good at ignoring things. Not just advertising, but advertising is one of the things that they are very good at ignoring. And so that is quite important to take seriously. The last thing to say is that up until recently, we have perhaps had a free pass in the world of digital advertising, because we say that even if no one saw our advertising, there is cookie data from the billions of cookies that were dropped on people's computers and phones to perhaps suggest that this ad is working, even if it wasn't viewable or it wasn't viewed or something. I'm not entirely sure that that's a very good argument, but it doesn't matter because people have been making this argument that the cookies, that's where all the data resides. Well, thanks to GDPR over in Europe and the CCPA over in the States, and the activities and the actions that Google and obviously Apple have taken, cookies are going away. Up until now, we might have been able to rely on those things, but third-party cookies are no longer going to be a big part of the advertising ecosystem. And if anyone saw the impact that is going to have on business, have a look at Snap's share price, which fell pretty dramatically upon the realization that cookies are going away on Thursday. So in the place of cookie data, suddenly contextual data becomes far more important. Being able to put a price on the context in which you place your ads, and the formats themselves. I believe that was always important, but it's now become doubly, trebly important because of the decline of and the deprecation of third-party cookies. So at Lumen, what we do is, as I say, we measure attention. We measure the opportunity people have to see things, how many impressions reach the screen and whether or not they're technically viewable or not. But we also measure if anyone actually looked, not just the opportunity to see, but if anyone did actually see it. And then crucially, not just if they saw it, but how long they saw it for. To try and help us understand the sort of aggregate of attention that people get. What we'll see in a second is that people do engage with ads, but they tend to engage with it on quite a short amount of time. Ads do still work, but they probably work in a slightly different way than the way we think they work when we force people to watch them in the pre-test that we do. So in this example here, you had 1,000 impressions, and 51% of them might be what you called technically viewable, according to the IAB. But in actual fact, despite that 510 of these things were viewable, only 99% of them actually got looked at. This little ad down here for number 7, a makeup brand over here. And then these ads might have been viewable for 5, 10, 15 seconds, but people actually only spent around about 1.6 seconds with them. And that means that's an important learning in itself, but it allows us to construct a sort of single metric where you say, well, what if I got 1,000 impressions and then 9% of people, that's 90 people, looked at them for about 1.6 seconds. You do the math there, and you get about 148 seconds of attention per 1,000 impressions. Now, this is important in a second, because what you can start doing is using this same methodology to compare between media and between formats, but also between whole media as well. So we work with an amazing American company called TVision, who have a similar sort of technology to ours, but for TV. And we can create these sort of metrics for aggregate attention for all forms of advertising. So if you were to buy 1,000 30-second TV ads, according to the data from TVision, you might get about 6,000 seconds of attention. 1,000 15-second YouTube ads might get you 4,500 seconds of attention, whereas 1,000 mobile ads might get you about 422. Using this sort of common currency across media, we have the data for digital media and press and out of home and obviously TV, you can start looking at more unusual formats like the guys at InSkin. And from the data that we've been able to collect about them, you can start seeing that these InSkin desktop formats are creating about as much attention as a pre-roll advertisement. Of course, that has quite a big implication for how much you should pay for these sorts of things. While you can compare across data like this, it's also important to know what happens at the end of this. Why is this important? And the reason we think it's important is because attention seems to relate very well to recall. A recent big study that we've done with Dentsu across both Britain and America suggests that ads that don't get looked at have a small chance of being remembered, as you may, but ads that are not just viewable, but also viewed, actually looked at, have a far higher chance of being remembered, which is one of those sorts of things that you think you've discovered something very, very important until you might, perhaps talk to your partner or your friends down the pub about it, and they go, that's obvious, isn't it? I mean, that's bloody obvious. And indeed it is, but it's nice to have some numbers to go with it. The second thing is that when you get people to choose between options having been exposed to advertising, unless they look at the ads, they are very much, it's almost impossible to influence their brand choice. And so the same study with Dentsu had a look at ads that are viewable but not necessarily viewed, but then also looking at the impact on brand choice amongst ads that were not just viewable but also actually viewed. And then over in Britain, we've and globally actually, it works everywhere. We've been working to develop tags and sort of DSP plugins to link to sales. I know that's something that Rob is going to talk about as well, because I think it's a similar sort of thing that they have done at Playground. So I won't steal his thunder about that, but it's exactly the same sort of approach. And we find that the ads that people are predicted to look at are also the ones that people buy from. The key thing, though, is what are the drivers of attention here? And there are many of these things. There's size, there's time in view, and there's movement or video. There's skippability. There's device. There's many factors that go into this. The challenge for us and being able to predict attention is understanding that all of these things happen at exactly the same time. You can't have form without content. You can't have size without time in view. It's always there. And so we try and build a predictive model that allows us to isolate all of these variables all at once. And we find that in the model that we've built for InSkin and others, we find that time is the single most important factor. Then things like skippability, movement, space, and how much the screen is taken over is about fourth or fifth thing. The device type, and then many other factors, including which website and the nature of the domain that it is on. These models can then be built into a tag that we can deploy on people's creatives and predict levels of attention based on all of these factors firing at the same time. So that's what our tag does, and I won't go into that too much, because you can put this on your creative, and this is exactly what InSkin and many others do to understand the level of viewability and the viewable factors that go into that, and then link that to estimates of how much your ad is actually being viewed, how that links to the cost of attention and the outcomes of attention. So not just understanding how much you're paying for different ads and whether that's a bargain or not, but also how that links to clicks and conversions and brand lift studies and things like that. The challenge, though, is that while we can predict an awful lot, creative is tremendously important as well. And so what we've also had to understand is the nuance that is added by doing by adding creative. And so we regularly build bespoke models for clients, such as InSkin, and in this case, at L'Oreal, where we ask people, where we conduct tests about how people engage with individual bits of creative or whole campaigns or whatever to build brand-specific models of attention. This is exactly what we did with InSkin just recently in Australia. This is one of our most recent Australian studies that we did last month, and we can start seeing the sort of attention data that you get. This is from 300 Australian women, all who perhaps might see it on a different website, which is why the website is a bit different there. But you get a feeling of how much attention is actually going to these skins and how it works across both desktop and mobile. And conducting these tests allows you to start making brand-specific models of attention. What we can see here is that the Garnier ads that we tested have done extremely well. They collected tons and tons of attention. I know as much as 20 times more than desktop display ads there. Not quite as much as some of the others that InSkin we've seen with InSkin, but it's still an extremely impressive result there. And this, I think, is super, super important because, as I'm sure other people have said before, and as other people will say again, the media part of the question is tremendously important, but the creative is also very important. And to try and unpick those two things is perhaps a fool's errand. So I'll conclude, but thank you very much for your time, to say just a couple of things. The first is that as an industry, we have been using, I think, fairly shonky statistics about how our campaigns work, using just impressions or even viewable impressions. But in actual fact, we know that there is a big difference between what people could see and what they do, in fact, look at. Within that, we spend an awful lot of time working out if anyone's noticed it, but perhaps less time thinking about how long they've noticed it for. Attention is always attention through time, and that's something that's tremendously important to take seriously. It's also important to realize that the same ads or the same the campaigns can be served against different publishers or against different formats, and these are not created equal. Some formats, some publishers are much better at making sure that your ads get noticed than others. And so simply counting the impressions and then imagining that they're all the same is not a good way of going forward. And then finally, there is now something we can do about this. The tags and the DSP plugins that Lumen and others have produced allow us to buy and measure and optimize attention rather than simply impressions. This has been something perhaps we've known about for a long time, but we've never been able to do anything about. But the rise of attention companies like Lumen and indeed Playground allow us to actually act on this insight in real time and achieve real business results. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll pass over to Rob or back to Fiona.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was great, and thank you to InSkin as well and L'Oreal for sharing those results with us today. Thank you. Continuing here our deep dive into the area of attention, our presentation here this morning from Rob Hall, the CEO of Playground XYZ. Rob is going to demonstrate how the application of attention signals can evolve the effectiveness and optimization of contextual advertising. Lovely welcome back to MeasureUp, Rob. Playground XYZ were the winners of last year's IAB MeasureUp Award for Best Advertising Effectiveness for their Attention Time report. So it's great to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome, and you're ready to go.
Awesome. Thanks again, everyone, and thanks, Mike, for all the kind words, and we feel the same about you guys. Peter touched on some really interesting stuff around context and how I guess, creative and context can come together and have a synergistic effect to drive incrementality around both the short-term and long-term memory building and how that can lead to sales. So our discussion today is really a kind of deep dive around how we see attention metrics and contextual advertising coming together in quite an interesting way, and in real time also. So Mike touched on this quickly, but the changing landscape around the deprecation of the third-party cookie does kind of present a need for advertisers to more seriously consider other options. And everyone asks this question of how they're going to identify people on the internet, post death of the cookie. We think the answer is you shouldn't be identifying people. People don't want to be identified. They don't want to be tracked. And really, this is giving rise to a bunch of alternate solutions that are really fascinating. One of them is, of course, contextual advertising. So it's having its time in the sun again, and it's about to really boom, we think. But it does have its challenges. And some of those are kind of things that you can look to solve with attention signals and create something pretty interesting. So when we talk about this, we give this example, like if you're a lipstick brand and you're told that through the death of the cookie, you need to do more contextual advertising, you would probably say, okay, I'm going to run context and I'll maybe go and create a list of keywords or content environments I want to be around. And I think to myself, well, I'm a lipstick brand, so I might be around beauty and makeup and lipstick environments. The problem is that you don't really know that those are the right places to put your ad. You intuitively think they are, and maybe you have some research from the past around focus groups or whatever. But you don't have the real-time feedback loop and the signals you need to say, okay, I'm delivering my ad into beauty environments. Is it working? And of course, on top of that, what if there are a whole bunch of other environments that are right for you, but you've started way too narrow? What if news was right, or gardening, or lifestyle, food? So you have this kind of conundrum where you're looking for ways to feel safe that you're moving away from targeting people with cookies and back into context, and to know that you are hitting the right audience and they're responding well to your advertisement and your creative. So attention signals can come in and kind of help with that. And we've got some interesting case studies we're going to walk you through today around that. Like Mike was mentioning, we have a metric, called attention time, which is the length of time in seconds the ad is actually looked at. This is based off eye tracking panels and predictive models, AI models kind of combined to get to this score. A presentation for another day, perhaps that one. But effectively, once you can figure out how long someone's looked at an ad, you start to have a really powerful signal of what we'd call ad relevance. So if someone chooses to spend longer with your ad in an environment than other ads in that environment, you can kind of say that, holding other things equal, that people are looking at your ad more, and that you've picked up on an environment that's driving ad relevance and resonance with your brand. Mike kind of touched on this, but the power of attention-based metrics like this is pretty profound compared to things like viewability. If you're able to, measure the impact of attention time compared to viewability, it's like 7.5 times more potent at driving awareness and 5.9 times more potent at driving recall. So the juice is definitely worth the squeeze when we're going after more attention time. And it is, like I said, a very powerful feedback loop. And just to kind of really put the pin in the difference between this and something like viewability, if we were to take an L.com article and buy the same ad position and put 3 different creatives into that, we would see very little difference in viewability, because viewability is driven by the publisher and where they choose to place the ad slot and things like latency and load times. Whereas attention time is driven by the consumer. Yes, some of those other factors feature in it, definitely, but incremental attention time is a voluntary thing of a consumer stopping and spending time with your ad. And that's the signal we want to pick up together. So we're kind of talking about this thing called the context attention loop. And really it's about saying, look, here's a way that advertisers can move into context and use attention signals to kind of know they're doing the right stuff. So effectively, you know, you've got to start somewhere. Hey, I've got an audience. I want to match it into some starting context. Then you use the signals to measure which are driving the most attention time on your ad. And then finally, you optimize to those contexts that are performing the best. So walking you through that example, what we do here is sort of say, okay, you know, you are after females 25 to 44 who are fashionable and into pop culture. This looks like a reasonable search space. Let's call it a search space to begin. Now, you don't want to start too narrow here. You don't want to start too broad. In kind of optimal terms, you start more broad, definitely. And then what you do is you start delivering your creative. And what we're doing with clients is saying, okay, your ad is landing on all these URLs. And we are running a separate asynchronous process where we say, okay, on this URL, what do we know about it? And we're using a natural language processing engine to understand what's sitting behind that URL in terms of contextual categories and keywords. And then we're able to categorize these URLs into buckets. Here's these articles about beauty. These articles are about body care. These are about fashion and so on. And then you're able to overlay the attention time that the ad is getting in those environments and start to see some really interesting stuff like, okay, my ad is over-indexing in beauty TV shows, but it is under-indexing in relationships and fragrances. So that's fascinating insight that, of course, has profound kind of, you know, implications beyond the campaign you're running. It's stuff that you can use, you know, very broadly. What's interesting then is, and Mike was touching on this too, is, you know, we're into this world of real-time, you know, optimization now too. So via DSPs and SSPs, being able to actually take this data and do something with it. So what you could do is things like, okay, if I'm under-indexing in body care, perhaps we should stop serving the ads there. And if I'm over-indexing in fashion, we want to put more impressions there, and same with beauty. So it's kind of a feedback loop, and you know, it's discover, you know, validate, and then optimize, and the loop goes round. So I'm going to walk you through a case study now, and this one is for Suzuki, car brand, and yeah, they basically had two vehicles, and it's Swift and Vitara, so two different creatives, and you kind of wanted to put deliver this, and we measured the attention time, and then we wanted to optimize it. So what was fascinating about this was, as we ran the natural language processing engine over the top, you started to see some really, really interesting stuff about how the two different vehicles deviated across different environments. So the Suzuki Swift is kind of more urban and female skewed and kind of urbanite, and the Vitara is kind of a little more SUV based, I think, and maybe a little more family oriented and maybe slightly male skewed. And you can start to see these things come out. So the Swift did better in food and drink, beauty and fitness, whereas the Vitara started doing better in games, bit better in auto and vehicles, and jobs and education, computer electronics. So what this shows and proves is that two different creatives with this, you know, from the same advertiser because they had, the two creatives had two kind of inherent audiences sitting behind them. And those audiences appear in different contexts, and you're able to pick up the signal of which contexts and which audiences in those contexts are resonating with your creative and which aren't. So by then sort of optimizing to the context for each of those vehicles, so they started getting delivered into different places, you're able to act as a kind of pre-bid filter, and only buy the impressions and the context where the ad is resonating the most. Things like that can get you a huge lift in attention time. And that drives subsequent lifts, and this is Mike's point and Peter's point, subsequent lifts in things like other behaviors that we care about, not only clicks, but importantly, conversions, and from conversions into sales and all of that stuff too. So what we're looking for here is a, you know, strong linear relationship between these kind of uplifts from the optimized to the non-optimized portions. So if I kind of wrap that up and then I'm done, really this is a new frontier, which we think is really interesting and being driven by the deprecation of the cookie is driving a need for a change in both how you target and how you measure. And things like the context attention loop provide a solution for both of those, which is fascinating. You know, the learnings are that brands, as they move to context, are often too restrictive, and we should definitely be starting more broad with a bigger search space. The second thing is that metrics like viewability aren't great signals at all of ad effectiveness. They're great signals that you have the opportunity to be seen, but they're driven by the publisher and the placement mostly. Whereas attention signals are very great feedback loops of ad relevance, and we should be using these to validate we're in the right context. And finding the right context does matter, because when we do optimize the creative into the right environments, we do get lifts, and those lifts are translating into business outcomes. So that's me. The best thing of all I wanted to finish on is there's no identifiers. And, you know, as an industry, if we could build these solutions in this way and give a nod to consumers and the way they want privacy to be treated, that's kind of a win for everyone. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, Rob. That was a great presentation and some really great pointy tips at the end there. We're going to go back to Fiona now. So if you've joined us late in the session today, we had Fiona Walford join us this morning, had a tiny little technical hitch. So Fiona is from Creative Works at Google, and she has a presentation for us today on creative being the last unfair advantage. Fiona's...
So Natalie, can you help me, let me know where I got to before I froze?
Do you want to just do a very quick, flick through your
sure
recap of your...
Do you want me just to canter through it at a fast rate of knots instead?
Fabulous.
In the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Thank you.
Right, cool. No worries. Sorry, guys. Very annoying. Being in England, 7 minutes to go. I will smash this out for you. So last unfair advantage, obviously, as you know, is a Bill Bernbach term and could not be more relevant than right now. So I think we work really closely with creative agencies and production agencies and companies to kind of bring out the very best work. And this is about that intersection between data and creativity. And it's not a war, because I still fundamentally believe in the creativity, but I think we're just learning so many new things. And what we're learning every 6 months is so much more than I learned in the first 20 years in this business. And it's just simply to do with everything to do with data and machine learning. And I'll show you some of those examples in a second. But it's really helping us with creative. It's not hindering us. It's helping us to kind of really tune versus obviously come up with any of those ideas. And I think the main thing to say is why now. It's like we used to, in the olden days, put out an ad 6 to 8 months later, we'd get some results back. They might be a bit of results, they might be a bit of learnings, they might be a bit of sort of folklore, a bit of sense. Now we're in a world where we've got machine learning, we've got absolutely objective human scoring too, but like hundreds of experiments on watch time and BLS studies and so on and so forth. And so we just find ourselves being able to kind of collide lots of information, including geographies and verticals and stuff like that. We find ourselves with this kind of mass of information. You will know this iceberg. It is all about the fact that roughly, and I think you've probably just seen a ton on this, but media used to be roughly around 30+% of return on investment of the money you spent, and creative was around 70. We've always seen the value of creative, but the things that are starting to flip are that, you know, we've talked about it, but we didn't know if it was true. And now not only do we know that creative is the dominant driver of results every time it's studied, but it is by some increment the dominant driver. And it's kind of, if you're going to do one thing right now, and I can see that people have kind of touched on it, just jumping back in on how important it is, leaning into your creativity is just kind of absolutely fundamental. So what's actually happening is this iceberg used to be the known quantities at the top, all about media science, data efficiency. We know how this works. And then that creativity at the bottom, the magic, the folklore, the instinct, you know, we couldn't quite get a handle on it. Well, that white is slipping down the iceberg now, and we're learning more and more about it. You will never get away from that magic, folklore and instinct, and thank God for that. But learning those new things help all of us to kind of maximize creativity and make the most of it. It's worth saying there's an extra element in here, which is media is becoming increasingly automated. There are bits of it that we can throw creative effectiveness in. So this example on the right-hand side is apps. So the media automates the way that it optimizes to make apps work really better. We have numbers of creative assets that we keep refreshing that can also become much more automated in the delivery of it. But I think it just still shows that we can play with creative to make it better and better. And that's kind of where that effectiveness really, really lands. So how we've been able to understand more and more about ads is really, it's not just about kind of what the format is, but increasingly it's like, what are those ad elements? How does the narrative structure work? What is the brand and product presentation, et cetera, et cetera? Is there use of audio? So those things were the first places that we started. Now we can understand what is it that's driving awareness? What is it that's driving purchase intent and all those other areas? Throw into that we now know what clients are after, and we can put that information in as well and start giving us answers with that. Are we going to be targeting young mothers? Are we targeting empty nesters? What are they telling us themselves? And throw geographies into it. It's an absolute beast, but it's really, really interesting what we can learn from it and how we can start really leveraging these pieces of information. What are we learning about how to understand creative? It's cantered ahead. Literally, we've gone only from like 3 years ago for being quite siloed and quite limited to these kind of integrated efforts and validation at scales that we're going to have in 2022. But if it was easy to uncover, we would have figured it all out by now. And if it was easy to do, everybody would have done it. Obviously, there are things that we have had to spend a lot of time and energy, obviously assessing, and we want to make sure that we're doing absolutely the right things in there. This is not about making it really easy for everybody. But the good news is all of this information is available. The slightly less good news for all of you is there's no checklist. We can't just flick a switch and everything's going to work and go boom, boom, boom. But obviously the good news is we can kind of work with you. If you gauge and focus, you can really kind of lean into this area. So it's inside the ads we're seeing the real effectiveness. It's like actually digging into what the ads are structured like and what they look and what they feel like that we're learning. And the top 3 things are surface, structure, and substance. And the effectiveness of them kind of goes in that linear process from less improvements all the way to much bigger improvements. Great example here. We had a Sour Patch Kids Mondelez ad. It was very dark, it was very slow, it had no lift on the platform. We worked with them, we zoomed in, we used large type supers, we brightened it up, we paced it faster. They got great improvements. So just by taking an ad you have that's already existing, you can make really, really significant differences by editing it. But other ads where you're thinking about from scratch, in this instance, actually, there was a TrueView ad for Amazon, and we used that and we broke it down as some bumpers and did it as sequencing. We drove consideration massively by just looking at extra formats and extra ways of delivering that messages against certain audiences. So thinking about the structure of the ad, so much more behind that. I don't have time to talk about it. And then rebuilding the structure. Here was a great ad from BMW that had very average, it was story driven. And then what we worked out, that we've worked this out across lots of industries, if you focus on specific things, then actually you can drive really amazing recall. And in this instance, we found with auto ads, very interestingly, you should put much more of the interior in as well as the exterior. It worked much better. So again, thinking about what those structures are. And we've got these kind of 5 top levers that we've done a ton of work with Kantar to get them registered and understood. They're driving incredible results from thousands of experiments, 30% lift for short term, 17% for long term. And we've actually also found that ads that we did have on TV that we went away and tuned for YouTube have actually been put back on TV and work better. So thinking about the way that you're telling your stories are really important. We don't want everybody to make the same ad. This is not about a vanilla ice cream. This is about working with you to find how to tune your ad. This is very specific to you. This is not a set of generics. And so lean in and talk to us. But there are kind of 3 things you can do. Learn this language. Don't let your agencies do it. If you need to understand what your ads look like and how they're going to be different, we'll help you. We'll help you experiment. Don't just do the tactical thing. Think about your storytelling strategies, the formats and other platform and how you can build for the platform, and lean into ask us questions. You're going to need to after this. Is the shortest, quickest presentation ever on something quite detailed and informative. Thank you for your time and attention. I think I've taken you a minute over. I don't know how I've done that, but thank you very much, and hopefully lean into me and I can give you a ton more information on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fiona. That was wonderful. Did very well to get that in. And and hang in there with us.
Thank
So
you.
that brings us to the end of our Measure Up session today. Thank you very much to all of our wonderful speakers, and thank you for joining us today. Please join us again tomorrow. We've got another brilliant lineup of presentations on driving trust and transparency for more effective campaigns. And please also join us tomorrow afternoon, where we will have a little celebration of award-winning research and ad effectiveness, and would love for you to join us for that one. A separate registration is required for that one, so jump onto the IAB website to register. Thank you all very much and have a great day.